Some fantasies of children are useful, some are destructive. To our children, all fantasies are very real and have an influence. Some understanding of the reasons for these fantasies is important to all parents and educators. The characters in our story are Ann Winters, a mother, natural, affectionate, and anxious to do the right thing. Bill Winters, her husband, athletic, well-adjusted, a believer in things will turn out all right anyway. Joey, their son, a normal, healthy 6-year-old with plenty of imagination. Janet Adamson, a neighbor, mother. Peter, her husband, sensitive, artistic, more idealistic than practical. And their children, Janie and Pete, aged 11.
Good night, darling. Sleep tight.
Stay with me for a little while, Mommy.
But you've had a long story already. Now the Adamsons and Daddy are waiting for Mummy.
But I don't like it in the dark.
But Mummy and Daddy are going to be just at the bottom of the stairs.
But it's dark.
Of course it's dark. It's always dark at bedtime. If it were light, we couldn't sleep so well.
But there's bears.
Now, Joey, you know there couldn't possibly be any bears in the house, could there? We talked about that before, didn't we?
But I'm still afraid.
All right, dear. I'll leave the hall light on for you. Mummy and Daddy are going to be just at the bottom of the stairs if you want anything. Good night, dear.
Good night.
Hello, Janet. Hello, Peter. Sorry to keep you waiting. Joey's been making a fuss every night. He's scared of bears again, dear.
Bill was saying he's afraid of the dark.
A lot of 6-year-olds are. And they often have nightmares about people and animals, too.
It's funny, I don't know what frightened him. I wonder if it's serious.
Maybe tied up with some personal strain he's under in the daytime. Not necessarily anything to do with animals.
Like what?
Well, I don't want to be personal, but sometimes dreams of frightening animals are tied up with a father figure.
You boogeyman, you?
Are you tough on him? Trying to make him into a little man?
Well, I try to give him a little discipline.
Oh, he spoils him.
I spoil him.
No, I don't think it's anything like that, Janet.
I think he sees too much TV. Some of the stuff those kids watch is enough to scare anybody.
Sure it is, but those are the programs they like best. They get a terrific bang out of them. Joey knows they're not real.
But so many programs have to do with fighting and killing.
Oh, I know, and I'm not condoning the people who put that stuff on the air.
Well, I don't suppose we should make Joe different from all the other kids by stopping him from watching. This is the kind of world he's growing up in, whether we like it or not.
Besides, they do learn a lot from TV. It stimulates their imaginations and helps them express their feelings.
It's the same with comics. I think a lot of kids read lurid comics because they feel lurid first. It isn't always the comics that start things off.
But what we can do, though, is help our children to be selective about comics and TV. Oh, I let our children buy comics. I think it helps them to relax sometimes. Not the horror ones, of course.
You have no control over what they trade at school, though.
No, but I try to help them to develop a critical sense for themselves. But, Janie, dear, they're not funny. They're not like anything that really happens. And they aren't even pleasant to read. Don't you think you'd be wasting your time on these? You see? They really are horrible pictures and stories, aren't they?
I think children's interest in sex comics comes from an urge to know about sex.
Formation. I talk to Janie whenever I think she feels like talking. I've explained as much as I think she can understand and given her... Actually, children need this kind of escape. And I think the best substitute for too many comics are well-written books of adventure or fantasy.
And children certainly love being read to. Joey will even leave the TV if I'll read to him. Sharing the story with me seems almost more important to him than the story itself.
Sure. The relationship with you is half the joy of it.
Now, you're a psychologist, Janet. Do you think that the fairy stories we read to Joe could make him afraid of the dark?
Well, that depends.
Oh, certainly not. Fairy tales have existed since the beginning of time. They've had them in every culture.
There must be a basic need for them.
Yes, but...
Besides, the characters and emotions are universal. They help a child to understand people.
But Pete, fairy tales should be carefully selected. Some of the so-called classics have unnecessary terror elements in them. You take the birds pecking out the eyes of Cinderella's wicked stepsisters at the wedding. Now, if you saw that in a comic, you'd be shocked. Well, there are edited versions that retain the fantasy without the terror.
And we must have that fantasy unless we want to bring up a race of materialists. After all, it's the daydreamers who bring progress, isn't it? Look at Jules Verne and Thomas Edison. Their ideas were once considered fantastic, weren't they?
Well, I believe in reading fairy tales. I don't think it's stories that frighten Joey. He knows when I'm reading him things I believe and when I'm just imagining things with him.
Oh, there you are. Relationship with the parents again. It's quite true that a child's attitude to fantasy usually depends on his mother's.
Now that we're on the subject of things we believe, Janet, what about this anti-Santa Claus stuff?
Well, if you make Santa Claus so real to a child that he doesn't realize it's just fantasy, someday he's going to find out about it. And after that, you won't have such faith in what you say.
Psychology.
You two better get together on how you bring up your children.
I have a lot of trouble with him. But seriously, suppose a child's parents have told him about the birth of Jesus or the story of Hanukkah, and they've told him that Santa fills his stocking, too. Now, the neighbor children tell him that there really is no Santa Claus. To him, this was the most important Christmas story. What about the other story? He can't turn to his parents because they have been a party to the lie about Santa.
Oh, agreed, but suppose you got yourself into this Santa Claus business. How are you going to get out of it?
Oh, but surely the parents should have a warmer and a stronger influence on their own child than his playmates have. He should turn to them for help if this crisis comes.
It's a lucky child who can.
Well, with Joey, it was no crisis, just a gradual dawning. He figured out for himself that Santa Claus couldn't be a real person. There are too many of them.
There isn't a real Santa Claus, is there, Mom?
Well, you get a lot of presents from someone who loves you, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, that's who Santa really is, someone who loves you very much.
I hope I get a radar set and a two-wheel bike.
And if you get them, it won't matter whether Santa's real, will it? It's just fun to imagine him.
Yeah.
And if he didn't have some kind of fairy tale magic, he couldn't possibly visit all the children everywhere on one night, could he?
No.
You go to sleep now.
The best way to avoid the crisis is not to let Santa Claus be the most important part of Christmas. There are so many other exciting things. There's the special programs and music at church and school, and singing carols in the neighborhood on Christmas Eve, as well as the expectancy of getting the food ready, there's making the Christmas cards, and the planning and wrapping of gifts for others, and decorations that the children can help with. There really can be plenty of excitement during Christmas besides Santa.
But if we don't retain some of the fantasy and magic of Christmas, we'll be losing one of the warmest traditions we've got left in this cold and practical world.
Well, I think it's possible to be essentially honest with your child and reliable in your attitude to real situations and still enjoy the fantasy of Santa Claus.
It's all very well for you artists and mothers to enjoy fantasy, but I think that children use unreality to escape from reality.
Well, not only children, adults just as much. Ann, don't you ever dream of the new dress you're going to get or where you're going to take Joey next summer?
Oh, I'm for daydreaming, Peter. I think it keeps us going.
But it's really just an escape.
Joey does it all the time just to bolster himself up. He's always telling me little white lies.
Guess what, Mommy?
What, dear?
I played on the big boys team.
Did you, dear?
And I hit a home run and everybody clapped and cheered for me.
Is that so, Joey? Well, it's certainly fine to think about those things, isn't it? And if you work hard at your pitching, you really will be one of the best men in the team by the time you're in the 3rd grade.
I think that's just outright lying. And it shouldn't be encouraged because it takes the place of real achievement.
But it is very common at 6, Bill. Of course, what he needs is real achievement.
If he wants to do a thing so much he dreams he's done it, that's your cue, Bill, old boy. You've got to get out there and play ball with him.
Or make sure he has some other activity where he can have real success.
That's where creative play is useful. Joe can express his longing to play baseball and at the same time satisfy his need for achievement by painting or play acting.
The pitcher throws the ball. Joey hits it. Hooray! Joey wins the game.
I think puppets are the most useful toys Joe has, really I do.
Certainly. I think real activity is the answer to too much daydreaming.
Let's not assume that daydreaming is bad, though. Without it, there'd be no art, no music, no progress. It just needs to be channeled into creative living.
Well, imagination may be all right. But the trouble is that if they go in for this daydreaming, or escape from reality through movies and TV, or even art, especially as they get older, they just never learn to face life as it really is.
You've got a good point there. For instance, look at poor little Mrs. Enman. That is such an unhappy marriage. She was a very pretty girl, but she was always reading romantic stories and going to the movies. As a result, she imagined herself as the glamorous wife of a wealthy man. It just didn't turn out that way. Jack Enman is a nice fellow, but they're not. Janie has all kinds of wild ideas of how she'll live when she's married. I encourage her to some extent, but at the same time, I try to give her a sense of reality by showing her that there is a practical side to glamour. I don't want Janie to be another Mrs. Enman. There is more to marriage than just romance.
I agree with you, Janet. I think we should let children soar as high as they can with imagination, as long as they keep one foot on the ground.
Janet, can't we let our children keep both feet just a little above the ground, please?
You know, there's another kind of common fantasy that parents don't take seriously enough. Do you know little Gloria Jameson down on Elm Street? She plays with a little girl called Rosie, who never really existed at all. They carry the thing too far. They put an extra plate at the table for her. Gloria leaves room on the swing for her. Rosie and Gloria go everywhere together. The fact is that Gloria's just compensating for being the only small child on the block. Her brother is 8 years older, and she needs a playmate. It's very common. 4 is the peak age for imaginary companions. Up till then, a little of it's okay. It's only a problem if the child begins to depend on it to fill some emptiness.
Yes, but what can parents do about it? We can't all have big families.
No. And the playmate business can be quite a problem. But usually there's some way to solve it. Like having friends over. Or the parents could get her a pet, even a cuddly doll. And the mother could try and spend a little extra time with her. If children are busy, they haven't time for imaginary companions. But if they spend too much time in a world of their own making, they may have trouble later adjusting to the real.
Yes, look at Tom Jones. He had an imaginary friend when we first moved here. He's 13 now. None of the boys will have anything to do with him because he tries to boss them like he did his imaginary pal. Of course, a little bossing's all right, but Tom wants everything his own way or he won't play. You know, Joey used to have a friend called the fireman. He used to talk to him all the time. The fireman told him stories at night when I left him. He seems to have given him up pretty well now, thank goodness.
There you are. The imaginary character was created to fill a need.
How do you mean?
Fear of the dark. He created the fireman to protect him. Now he's outgrown his belief in the fireman, but nothing was really solved by it. He still has the fear.
Maybe you're right.
Of course. Now he takes his puppet to bed with him.
Creative play, you see. Channeling his imagination into something he can do.
We do try to make him interested in the dark and in night. We play games and talk about the stars.
Let's turn the light off, eh?
Mm-hmm.
There, now we can see the stars better. Ah, it's a beautiful, clear night, isn't it, eh?
Yes?
You see that big star straight up there?
Yeah?
Well, now, that's the North Star. You know, when sailors are out in the ocean, they use that as a marker to steer their ships by. Stars are the sailors' friends.
Why can't we see them in the daytime, Daddy?
Oh, well, because the sun is too bright and they don't show. You see, we have to have the darkness to see them.
And why can't we touch them?
Oh, well, they're an awful long way away, and we haven't got any way of getting there yet, you see. Well, what do you think this looks like?
A rabbit.
That's right. And what's that?
A duck.
That's right.
Look what I can do, Daddy.
Hmm?
What's this?
Well, that looks like a horse.
No, it's a donkey.
Oh, of course it's a donkey.
Look what I can do, Daddy. What's this?
That looks like a galloping horse, is it?
No.
I know, it's a spider.
Yeah.
I I'd like to know what's at the root of Joey's fear of the dark. If he's building up fantasies, there must be some reason. And that's the clue you're looking for. But until you find it, all these things you're doing should help. I mean, this expression through puppets and talk of real things in the dark and so on.
That's right. I really think it's just a passing phase. The children's fantasies are fascinating, aren't they? We could go on talking all night.
It's a tremendous subject. And we haven't even touched on those secret inner fantasies that children build up for themselves through misinterpreting the actions and words of adults.
Oh, you read about terrible cases that affect children's whole personalities.
How do you mean, affect their whole personalities?
The foster child fantasy, for example. About 1 child in 10 at some time or other gets the idea that his parents are not his real parents.
But if it's so common, what does it really matter? As long as it doesn't affect his relationship with his parents.
But it's likely to very seriously affect it.
Well, but surely it must have been caused by some difficulty with his parents in the first place.
Yes, of course. Either a real lack of affection or a misunderstanding of some situation. Same as the martyr fantasy. Some children, for one reason or another, begin to feel sorry for themselves. They can't see situations objectively, and they think everyone's picking on them. The feeling of being picked on can become a major fantasy. And these fantasies can be both an effect and a cause of poor adjustment between parents and children.
Well, there we are, back to the same old point. Relationship with parents. I think most of these harmful fantasies are built on some sort of tension that could be eliminated.
Sure. As long as kids get lots of fresh air and exercise and 3 square meals a day and a little discipline, they'll turn out all right. I'll go and take a peek at Joe.
Oh, Bill, it takes more than that, and you know it. I don't know why he talks that way when he's really quite a good father.
Well, one thing is certain. To get the most out of life, a child needs to be sure of his parents' love.
Well, I don't know how they get that way, but as far as I'm concerned, there are only 2 kinds of people. Those with imagination and those without. And as long as our children grow up in the with imagination category, they'll be all right.
Well, Joey's all right, then. He's playing pirates up there now with his puppet.
Listen, John, the natives have killed a bear. Boom, 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 boom.
Yes, Joey has plenty of imagination, all right. And Janie's got imagination, too. Enough to persuade the sitter to let her bake a cake mix and design an original greeting for Mummy's birthday tomorrow. She probably daydreamed about it first, but she knew how to channel her daydreams into creative activity. And Janet's little boy, Pete, he's asleep by now, but still surrounded by evidence of a full and imaginative childhood. As we have listened to these neighbors talk about children and fantasy, 5 things seem to have emerged clearly. First, most children have plenty of imagination and should be free to express it, actively, not just passively through TV and comics. Second, it's up to parents or other adults to keep fantasy and reality in balance for each individual child. Third, it helps to keep this life if fantasy is expressed in creative living. Fourth, a child's acceptance of the real world and his enjoyment of fantasy depends on his relationship with his parents and on their attitude to fantasy. And finally, as we said at the beginning, all fantasies have their reasons, and therefore they must be respected. If we learn to respect and understand our children's fantasies, we can better understand our children.